In this week's drive, we play rough in the All-Star Challenge, fall over in the Outback Challenge, slide to an easy win, and loop the loop to a tough one. All this and more in this week's Drive. We start this week in sunny Italy for rounds 7 and 8 of the World Touring Car Series, and with veteran Fabrizio Giovanardi starting from pole position on home soil. But Giovanardi was passed by Antonio Garcia, who'd started second on the grid, and Andy Priaulx, who made a daring manoeuvre up the inside from 5th place. The Alfa may lack the acceleration of the BMWs, but its top speed allowed the Italian to reclaim the lead. Briton Priaulx was passed before the end of lap 1, and Garcia's time at the front of the pack was short-lived as Giovanardi squeezed the Spaniard to the outside at the end of lap 2. Giovanardi held on to the lead for the remaining 9 laps of the race and claimed his first win of the season. Garcia finished second ahead of Priaulx, while Dirk Muller claimed 4th to increase his lead at the top of the drivers' standings. The top 8 finishers were reversed on the grid for race 2, so Alex Zanardi started from pole position, with fellow Italian Giovanardi back in 8th. Dirk Muller made a great start from 5th on the grid, but Zanardi also made a clean start and held the lead. However, Muller saw his chance at the end of lap 3, and the German passed Zanardi. Seconds later, Priaulx also got ahead of Zanardi, and a battle for the lead began. Zanardi really wanted his first WTCC podium, but Brazilian Augusto Farfus made a final attempt to pass on the last lap, but his manoeuvre took both of them off the track. Priaulx's attempts to claim the lead were continually dashed by Muller, who won the race. Race 1 winner Giovanardi profited from the collision between Zanardi and Farfus, and he finished 3rd ahead of Rickard Rydell of Sweden. Priaulx's 2 podium finishes lifted him to 2nd place in the drivers' standings, but he trails Muller by 6 points. After the races, stewards ruling over the incident between Farfus and Zanardi in race 2 decided the Brazilian will lose 10 positions on the grid of the next race. But if he's involved in a similar incident during one of the 2 following events, he will also be excluded from that race. The annual All-Star Challenge is not part of the NASCAR series. It's run in stages of 40, 30 and 20 laps with a 10-minute stop in between. The race featured 4 drivers who had NASCAR championships but not All-Star victories: Dale Jarrett, Bobby Labonte, Tony Stewart and Kurt Busch. With just 5 laps remaining in the first segment, Stewart clipped the back of Joe Nemechek's car, sending it spinning into Kevin Harvick. That ignited an 11-car accident that brought out the red flag. Stewart was done for the day, along with Harvick, Nemechek, Casey Kane, Terry Labonte, Martin Truex and Michael Waltrip. Dale Earnhardt, Matt Kenseth, Bobby Labonte and Carl Edwards were all involved, but able to continue.
We caught up with Kevin Harvick. Kevin, a lot of frustration boiling over. Yeah.
Harvick and Nemechek, who've tangled in the past, got out of their wrecked cars and shoved each other, each blaming the other for the crash, but they kept their helmets on throughout.
Pretty badly damaged.
Pretty smart guys. They don't take their helmets off till they get to kind of growling at each other.
Some of the momentum.
Mark Martin, the 1998 All-Star Challenge winner, was back for one final spin before his planned retirement at the end of the year. He wasn't the only person considering retirement. Rusty Wallace has been thinking about it too. After finishing 6th in the second segment, Wallace spun teammate Ryan Newman on the first lap of the final segment, and they collided against the wall in turn 2. On the restart, Martin was in second place, lined up next to Sadler with 19 laps left in the race. But Sadler bumped into the side of Martin on the restart, and the contact knocked Sadler out of line. Martin then smoothly dropped down and took the lead. Martin held off Sadler for the rest of the segment to cruise to his second victory at the All-Star Challenge, winning more than $1 million US. Afterwards, he said he'd be back for next year's challenge. As an all-star race winner, Martin is forever eligible to enter the race, regardless of whether he competes for the rest of the year. ahead of the 89th running of the Indianapolis 500, racing drivers posed with former American Secretary of State Colin Powell in New York's Times Square. Mimicking the grid's starting order, the drivers lined up in 11 rows behind pole sitter Tony Kanaan. Also on display was the famous Borg Warner Trophy. Powell will lead the rolling start of the Indy 500. The retired general turned politician posed with Kanaan's green and white car on a small concrete island between Broadway and 7th Avenue for photographers and a large crowd armed with picture phones. Later, three key figures voiced their feelings ahead of what is called the greatest race.
Concentration is very important. You have to always be on. It's over 200 miles an hour, and you can't be waving at the public. Physically, you don't need much stamina, but you certainly need mental stamina for the race.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fun day for us, for sure. I mean, obviously, people keep reminding me that I'm the champion, that I'm starting from the pole, but this was good to get out of Indianapolis and get our minds a little bit off the race that we have Sunday.
You know, it's a big event, and we're in Indianapolis for an entire month in preparation for the race, and I think that just shows how important it is. And I think as a team and for sure as a driver myself, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling comfortable.
The 5'2", 100-pound Patrick is aware of her appeal as just the fourth female to earn a spot at the Indy 500 and takes the responsibility seriously. But she's no slouch behind the wheel. Her qualifying speed of 227 miles an hour was fourth fastest, earning her the top starting position by a woman in the race's history.
I was meant to do this, and I think I was just prepared from the time I was born.
At least at the age of 12.
What are you going to do today?
We're gonna
win. Back then, she was burning up the kart track. Motorsport reporter Ed Hinton saw something special in Danica when she was just 15.
What really struck me about her was just this look. Not a harsh or mean look, but just this icy look in the eyes.
During a race in March, she was involved in a frightening crash into the wall. It looked like she would get away with it, but at well over 200 miles an hour, things happen fast and the walls are hard. But she has bounced right back. The 23-year-old from Illinois inhabits the intersection of speed and sex appeal, and she's making the most of both. She also has a marketing appeal that the male drivers lack.
I have a very feminine side to me. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with wanting to be girly sometimes.
The demographic that we're seeking to develop is males 18 to 34. She's certainly helping us grow that area of our demographic, no question.
IndyCar racing has lost some of its popularity to NASCAR. The hope is that Danica Patrick can turn that around. The World Superbike races at Silverstone saw close racing. Despite qualifying fourth on the grid, championship leader Troy Corser quickly passed first corner leader Noriyuki Haga, although the Japanese, riding the Motor Italia Yamaha, stayed tucked up the Australian's exhaust. Haga continued to chase Corser, but it was Ducati's Regis Laconi who was soon making his presence felt, and by the halfway mark had reeled in and then passed Haga before relieving Corser of the lead with 15 of the 28 laps gone. Behind him, James Toseland moved up from fifth and took third place, while the unfortunate Haga pulled out with mechanical problems with 2 laps to go. Corser, who later revealed that he had problems with rear tyre grip, which hampered his challenge, toiled in vain to reclaim his lead, and Laconi repulsed a late charge to claim victory and the 25 points. 33-year-old Corser took the checkered flag, just 0.096 of a second behind the Frenchman, with reigning world champion Toseland in third place. First off the line in the second race was again Haga, closely followed by the Suzukis of Corser and Yukio Kageyama and the Ducati pair of Laconi and Toseland. But Laconi came to grief on lap 2. Max Neukirchner and Jose Luis Cardoso crashed out with him. Corser eventually managed to claim the lead from Haga and looked like he was taking charge at the head of the race, until Toseland made his move. Toseland passed Kageyama on lap 6 and by lap 12 had reeled in the front 2 as he diced with Haga and chased Corser for the lead. Then, on lap 16, Toseland passed Hager and began stalking Corser, slipping by a lap later. And soon the Briton's advantage over the Australian was more than half a second. With 5 laps remaining, Corser bounced back to close up on the 24-year-old world champion, but he couldn't haul him in. Toseland held on to lead home Corser, with Hager third, a Ducati, Suzuki and Yamaha ridden by a Brit, an Australian and a Japanese. But former world champion Corser is still way out in front in the overall standings. He leads on 222 points, 78 ahead of teammate Kageyama, who crashed out of race 1, and is a further 3 points ahead of fellow Australian Chris Vermeulen, with Laconi in 4th. Toseland is down in 5th place, 124 points behind Corser. The Motocross World Championship Tour moved to Sugo for the Grand Prix of Japan. Belgian Yamaha rider Stefan Everts brought a 9-point championship lead into the MX1 Grand Prix, 6th leg of the 2005 season. His closest rival for the overall title, France's Michael Pichon, came into the event with confidence high after a dominant victory on his Honda in the previous round, the European Grand Prix at Tuchenthal in Germany. He grabbed pole during Saturday's qualifying, with reigning and multiple world champion Everts starting in 3rd place. In the first race, the Frenchman led virtually from start to finish, holding off the challenge of Everts for another victory. KTM rider Ben Townley of New Zealand was 3rd. The second race followed a similar pattern, although this time there was a 3rd rider involved in the battle for the lead, Everts' fellow Belgian Joel Smets, who was joint 3rd in the championship, alongside New Zealanders Joshua Coppens heading into the Japanese Grand Prix. This time it was Everts who came out on top. Smets claimed 2nd place on his Suzuki ahead of Pichon, and that was enough to hand Everts the overall Japan Grand Prix victory. A further 47 points, 25 for the win in the second race and 22 for the first race, moves Everts 11 points clear of Pichon in the championship. The next leg of the 2005 season takes riders back to Europe for the Grand Prix of Great Britain at Matchams in the New Forest. Combining superbike and motocross skills is the hybrid supermoto class. Practice for the S1 class was dominated by reigning world champion Thierry van den Bosch, and the Frenchman was also the fastest rider on the track in both races. He took the first race from arch-rival Gerald Delapine on his Husqvarna, with Ivan Lazzarini, also on Husqvarna, in 3rd. In race 2, Van den Bosch did even better. He was fortunate that Delapine had a terrible race, pulling out after just 10 of the 16 laps. The world champion wasn't threatened and took his 2nd win of the day, ahead of his KTM teammate Bernd Hiemer, and Lazzarini added another 3rd-place finish to his tally. The result means that from his performance in both races, Van den Bosch was able to claim his first Grand Prix victory of the season, with Lazzarini 2nd and Hiemer 3rd. Van den Bosch now leads the overall standings with 137 points, 18 ahead of Delapine, with Hiemer a further 6 points adrift of the lead. None of the riders managed to dominate the smaller S2 class races. Race 1 went to Belgian Eddie Seal on his Husqvarna, ahead of Stefan Blot of Yamaha, with Honda's Massimo Beltrami 3rd. In race 2, however, it was Boris Chambon who climbed to the top of the standings after finishing 9th earlier in the day. The Frenchman made an impressive improvement on his earlier performance to claim the win, ahead of Beltrami, with another Italian, Massimo Verderosa, 3rd. That result for Beltrami meant the Honda rider was able to claim the overall S2 class victory. Seal could only finish 17th in race 2, but his overall finish of 6th place ensured that he stayed on top of the championship standings with 111 points. Adrien Scherer, who finished 5th in both races, stands in 2nd place, 16 points behind, with Beltrami 3rd with 80 points. The next Supermoto Grand Prix will be in Austria. Meanwhile, the Speedway World Championship moved to a sweltering Krško in Slovenia for the 3rd round of the season. In the overall standings, Swedish multiple world champion Tony Rickardsson led reigning world champion Jason Crump of Australia by just 2 points before the meeting. Another Australian, Lee Adams, was 3rd at the start of the day, but he slipped back after failing to make the final four. Both Rickardsen and Crump battled their way through to Saturday's final, where they were joined by Denmark's Nicky Pedersen and the local favourite, Slovenian wildcard Matej Zagar. Rickardsen soon opened up a significant advantage on his three rivals, and from then on, victory was a formality for the Swede. Pedersen edged second place ahead of Zagar, while Crump trailed in fourth place. Rickardsen is a 5 times world champion, but has claimed at least one title, World, Swedish or World Cup, every year since 1997. Slovenian Zagar became the first Premier League rider to reach a Grand Prix final. Nicky Pedersen was back on the Grand Prix rostrum for the first time in 12 rounds when he finished second behind Rickardsen. It was Rickardsen's second victory of the season and takes him up to 70 points overall, 11 points clear of Crump in second. Pedersen has moved up to third place overall with 46 points, although he's now 24 points behind Rickardsen. Lee Evans is fourth with 42 points. Rickardsen won the season opener in Poland in April, following that with second at home in Sweden a fortnight ago, where Crump took the victory. The fourth leg of the season is the Grand Prix of Great Britain in Cardiff in Wales. The Outdoor Trials World Championship moved to Japan and the twin ring Motegi. Indoor world champion Adam Raga had a relatively disappointing weekend on his gas. Fourth place on both Saturday and Sunday saw him ousted as overall leader in the championship. This year saw a marked change from the usual cold and wet Japanese round, with hot and dry weather delivering dry and dusty sections. Riders were also presented with a course where most of the sections were new and very different. With 5 out of the 15 sections now more like indoor obstacles, many felt that this was uncalled for, as Motegi has some natural terrain to offer. The remaining hazards set outside the tarmac circuit had a similar theme, with steep and dry banks very much the order of the day. The man who displaced Raga was his fellow Spaniard, Albert Capistani. The Sherco rider was third on Saturday and followed up with a commanding win on Sunday. A total of 35 championship points from the weekend sees him move on to 67 points, 4 points clear of Raga at the top. Takahisa Fujinami enjoyed himself in front of his home fans. The Japanese Honda rider edged Mark Friescher and Capistani into second and third, respectively, on Saturday. He couldn't quite repeat his heroics on Sunday, however, and had to settle for third place. But it nevertheless rounded off a highly satisfying weekend for Fujinami. With 59 points, he's now equal third in the overall standings alongside veteran rider Dougie Lamkin. The 7-time outdoor world champion may not be quite the invincible force he once was, but the Englishman, still developing the 4-stroke Honda and the riding style it needs, was fifth on Saturday and second on Sunday. Capistani kept his cool brilliantly. Riding at the back of the field, he did what was necessary to come home 1 mark in the clear to give him the victory and a clear lead in the championship. Fujinami completed only the second clean lap of the second day, but this was only enough to secure him third place behind a rejuvenated Lamkin, who had used his physical size to muscle his bike through some sections. As the sun rose over LD Station, 55 teams assembled for the start of this grueling annual event. Ahead lay 7 days of competition over 21 stages, none of which were for the faint-hearted. This was the 7th running of the Outback Challenge, dominated in the past by Australians. However, drivers from the UK and South Africa were also entered to pit their wits against the local favourites. The teams and their vehicles had to drive and survive on all the surfaces the Australian Outback has to offer: dust, sand, mud, rocks and river crossings. Some drivers were finding the conditions tougher than others, Here, the South African pair of Alan van Schoor and Dennis Matum rolled their Jeep, shipped halfway around the world just for the event. Fortunately, neither was hurt and they ploughed on as quickly as possible. Standard vehicles would struggle in these conditions, hence all the rigs here were modified with increased ground clearance, uprated suspension and strengthened underbody protection, and they certainly all needed it. Viewmont on the Darling River near Menindee had long mud runs, which are rare in this drought-stricken region. Laurie Sternbeck and Sean Calcino had little problem driving through in their white Toyota, showing off the kind of skills needed to do well in this event. Denian has more typical sandy Australian wastes, which tested the team's recovery and sand driving skills. Rowan Canavan and Trent Jones blasted up the sand wall in their Nissan Chev with relative ease. There were also occasions where the teams raced against one another. Here, Brett Scrivener and Brent Quadding versus Roger Smith and Jason Jones traversing the sand. Overnight, the teams travelled on transit stages to the next tests, a vital time for rest, recuperation and recovery. Some vehicles found the terrain just too tough. Roger Smith and Jason Jones broke the suspension on their Range Rover. Ingenious bush repair saw the vehicle limp to the end. Matching their mud wading skills, Sternbeck and Calcino breezed up and over the aptly named Rocky Hill. The final day brought all the top teams together back at LD Station, where Australians Norm Walters and Kim Bolton were eventually crowned champions. Their Chev-powered Nissan was held together with straps, the power steering was broken, the exhaust had almost fallen off, and the navigator had a bad cold. They were especially pleased to win on behalf of Queensland, the first time that Australian state had won the Outback Challenge. Trent Lean and David Hickman came second, with third place going to Dean Kilmurray and Jack Talbot, all the teams driving Nissans. Hamburg, Germany was rocked by a mixture of showmanship, determination and pure talent. Libor Podmol of the Czech Republic had missed out on qualifying in the elite six-man field earlier in the evening, partly because of a crash while attempting a backflip. British rider Chris Brock squeezed into the six-man field, but he never looked like taking the win after he also crashed while attempted a one-handed backflip. There were no such worries for Andre Villa, whose can-can backflip to side-saddle landing, followed by a one-handed heart attack, had the crowd at fever pitch. It was difficult to see how the Norwegian could be beaten, but Mathieu Rebau embraced the challenge by beginning his final run with a stripper. The Swiss phenomenon followed it up with a no-footed one-handed backflip to leave the crowd in no doubt that they had their money's worth. But Rebau had one more party piece as his heel clicker backflip helped him equal Villa's 330 points. His superior first-round qualification point score of 266 to Villa's 259 saw the Swiss star confirmed as the winner.
It was super cool. The place was packed. It was a very good contest. It was great to be with Andre in the final and to win. It was cool, a match between equals.
The night of the jump series moves to Nuremberg with a 15th and final round in Cologne. So whether you like your racing up close and personal, getting too close for comfort, or just sliding down the track so you stay on track and up to speed, make sure you catch next week's Drive.